Let's move to the big discussion of the day. So US Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with his Indian counterpart, Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar. He met with National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, and of course he met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi today on his two-day visit. The meeting between the two foreign ministers was followed by a press conference where they outlined what the big issues were, and Afghanistan certainly seemed to top the agenda.
Yes, certainly what we're seeing on the ground in the last week is the Taliban making advances on district centers, challenging some provincial capitals. We've also seen these reports of atrocities committed by the Taliban in areas that it's taken over that are deeply troubling, and certainly do not speak well to the Taliban's intentions for the country as a whole. We remain very much engaged in Afghanistan in support of the government through the various forms of assistance we're providing, including to the security forces.
It is natural, I'd say inevitable, that if the United States, which for the last 20 years had a robust military presence in Afghanistan, withdraws that presence, that there will be consequences. We don't think outcomes should be decided by force on the battlefield. We think the peace negotiations should be a negotiation and should lead to peace. It should see cessation of violence. There should be a political settlement.
Right, I will be speaking with Nisha Biswal, President of USIBC this evening. Later in the show, I'll be joined by Manoj Joshi, Distinguished Fellow ORF, as well as Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, Distinguished Fellow for Foreign Policies at Gateway House. But let me begin by welcoming Ms. Biswal to the show. Pleasure to have you on the show once again. Let's just start by opening comments on how this sets the tone for the Biden administration's relationship with India. Of course, the US-India relationship now has come to the level where it doesn't, at the end of the day, matter beyond a point who's in the White House. But this first meeting was key, wasn't it, Ms. Biswal, considering the kind of voices that were being heard in the US demanding that issues of human rights, democracy, and certain steps that India has taken recently be raised?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your program. Let me just say that the U.S.-India relationship and partnership is a very, very deep and consequential one for both countries. This was not by any means Secretary Blinken's first meeting with the Indian Foreign Minister, Minister Jaishankar. They certainly had this year during the minister's visit to the United States, but they have a long and deep relationship from both of their prior tenures, when Secretary Blinken was the Deputy Secretary of State and when the minister was both ambassador here in the U.S. and was the Foreign Secretary. So they know each other well. They are both extremely well versed on the importance of the U.S.-India partnership. And I think that their very close relationship and history will serve them and their countries very well in advancing this partnership. It is increasingly important for the United States and India to work together to look at and resolve the myriad challenges that we face around the world. Both to India's east and to India's west, there are issues that require a coordinated effort between the United States and India to engage, but also looking at global challenges like the current pandemic crisis that is so impacting the U.S., India, and the entire world, the climate crisis. So I think this relationship is extraordinarily important to both countries and to our ability to advance global goals that we share.
You know, Ms. Biswal, the pandemic has, in a sense, pushed to the background another crucial aspect of the US-India relationship, which has been in limbo for some time, and that is a trade agreement between the two nations. There were initial talks during the end of the Trump administration, and then of course COVID cooperation and vaccines and all of that has taken over. Do you see this being on the back burner for some time now?
That there has been a lot of attention on a number of different crises, including the COVID crises, as well as regional and geopolitical issues. That said, both countries and both governments really need to prioritize the deepening of our economic partnership. You cannot have the kind of strength that you want to have on the geopolitical scene if the economic scene is not working at the same level and capacity and not meeting its potential. The potential for the United States and India is deep and it's vast. And that is seen by the way that our trade relationship has been growing. Just in the past 5 years, we've seen two-way trade and investment move from just over $100 billion to about $150 billion in two-way trade and investment. That is nowhere near its potential. We projected back in 2013 an ambitious goal of $500 billion in two-way trade and investment, and that is very much possible, but not without some real effort by both governments to clear some of the obstacles and really facilitate a greater ease of investment and trade in both directions.
Ms. Biswal, how is Washington looking right now at a slew of laws and rules in India that are impacting American companies doing business here? For example, Twitter and Facebook being impacted by the new intermediary guidelines, Amazon being impacted by retail rules, MasterCard, for example, recently impacted because of non-compliance with rules for data storage. What is the response in Washington to these?
Well, what I would say the response in the business community is that, we are bullish on India and on the U.S.-India corridor. That's why you see that even in the midst of pandemic, FDI flows into India continued at a robust clip. But in order to attract the kind of investment that will help the Indian economy grow from a $2 trillion economy to a $5 trillion economy, we want to see FDI rates into India, really increase. Potentially double. And to do that, we really need to make sure that there is a level playing field and that there is policy and regulatory stability. India has taken many steps in and reforms that have helped in improving the ease of doing business, the ease of investing. But really, until you create much more of a free trade environment, look at creating some bilateral or regional trade agreements, create some protections for investors, look at things like arbitration and dispute resolution, you're not going to get the scale of investment that can be transformative. And I think that is a really important opportunity, especially now when you see companies looking to diversify their supply chains, to looking at different aspects of security in the global supply chain. India stands to attract a lot of that investment if it can create a more level playing field, provide a little bit more stability in the policy environment. So I think there's a lot at stake for India, and I'm hopeful that trade will rise to a greater priority in the relationship for both countries in the coming months.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Biswal, for joining us on this leg of the conversation. Nisha Biswal of the USIBC there saying that regulatory stability is important for India to achieve the FDI goals it needs for its dream of a $5 trillion economy. I want to move on now to the impact that the US withdrawal from Afghanistan is having for the region, specifically for India. This was one of the aspects that were being talked about in the meeting between US Secretary Antony Blinken and Foreign Minister of India S. Jaishankar. Manoj Joshi, Distinguished Fellow ORF, and Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, Distinguished Fellow Foreign Policy Studies at Gateway House, joins us now. Welcome to both of you. Mr. Joshi, let me get your thoughts first. We are in a situation where US troops are withdrawing. The Taliban is already running amok. I'm sure New Delhi is very, very worried about what's happening. What can India do?
Well, India has a limited capability. We don't have a common border with Afghanistan. We have to go via Iran. The US relationship with Iran is not particularly great. And so what we can do is that as far as things like the Afghan Air Force is concerned, Afghan equipment is Russian origin, so is ours. We can help them to service it and to make sure that they keep flying, they are able to utilize it to the maximum. They have a major problem there. They don't have enough trained personnel. So I think if we can, for a while, transfer personnel there, also train their people back in India, and so that they can maximize the use of equipment which they already have in Afghanistan. So that's definitely one of them. And secondly, I think definitely from the point of view of diplomacy, we, along with Iran, maybe Central Asia, can develop diplomatic pressure on Pakistan and other countries to moderate what the Taliban are up to, because they've been trying to do, psychological tactics of launching an offensive, capturing all the border posts, all the places where Afghanistan crosses into other countries. They have captured many of those areas. So I think that's a very serious thing. And I think the US is also aware of it, and they have actually intensified their airstrikes in the last couple of days. And so we need to beat back, immediately we need to beat back the Taliban offensive. And thereafter, we have to take up the diplomatic challenge of trying to bring peace in Afghanistan.
Yeah, Ambassador Bhatia, if you could, explain for our viewers why the resurgence of Taliban and the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan is such a cause of concern for India, and why, in your view, it possibly dominated the conversation today.
Thank you, Tamanna. Greetings from Gateway House. Your question is pertinent. I think the cause of concern is because when there is instability, insecurity, and turbulence in the immediate neighborhood, there is always an apprehension and fear that this could spill over into your own country. And that's why at this particular time, when there is a very special kind of turbulence building up in Afghanistan on our west, and in a different manner in Myanmar on our east, there is a very natural reason for South Bloc and the government to be concerned about. But the important point to note is that India is not just concerned. India is very active in trying to address these concerns and these challenges. And essentially, this is being done through a very active regional diplomacy. I think if we study the itinerary of our foreign minister in the last 3 weeks or so, we would know that he has gone all around, contacted Iran, Russia, Central Asian states, and now having a deep conversation, or has had just deep conversation with US Secretary of State at a time when India's defense minister is already in Dushanbe attending SCO meeting. All this shows clearly the attempt to firstly urge everyone that the gains in the past 20 years in Afghanistan in terms of protection of women and minorities and civil society must be preserved. Second, that this new Afghanistan that would emerge, this should be independent, sovereign, democratic, stable Afghanistan. And at the second level, the point that is being projected by the Indian government is that Afghanistan should not be a source of terrorism to the neighboring countries, and it should not be a source for exodus of refugees from there to the neighboring countries. So this is the broad outline in which Indian diplomacy is in action today to address our concerns.
You know, it was a very wide-ranging conversation, as the press conference also talked about. There was Afghanistan on the table, Indo-Pacific region, Quad, climate change, COVID cooperation and all of that. But I just want to talk about the Indo-Pacific region. Mr. Joshi, in the context of China, now the Trump administration's relationship with China was extremely fraught. India's relationship with the United States grew even further in that context because India is always seen as a counterbalancing impact for China. The Biden administration's outlook on China is still not clear, whether they will be as aggressive as the previous government. Where does that leave India in that particular picture, and how does the US see India right now?
Well, I think, you have hit the nail on the head. The Biden administration is still in the process of reviewing and coming out with its new China policy. It hasn't done so as yet. So we've had different kind of views, we've had statements, and we've had statements which, if you look at them, some say that we should have engagement, some say we should have strategic competition. So there is a lot of confusion on that. And today, Secretary Blinken, he spoke, for example, about the Quad. Now, many people in India automatically assume that Quad is a kind of a semi-military alliance, which is going to take on China. But Blinken very clearly in the interview said that the Quad grouping does not have a military content, but it's a group of like-minded democracies, whose present task is to provide more COVID vaccine, deal with climate change, assure maritime security to infrastructure projects. So what I'm saying is, here is the US Secretary of State saying this. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to be very careful about this, that we should not get carried away by some of the hardline statements and hardline positions that we see even the Biden administration taking, because for the simple reason, the Biden administration has simply not yet worked out its China policy. It's still at work, and that policy, I think Wendy Sherman was in China last week. That policy basically continually emphasizes competition more than anything else, saying that we're going to compete with you guys, but we're going to avoid military confrontation. Military confrontation is the last thing that we want, which I think is perfectly logical, meaning when you have two major military powers, we don't want them to have a military confrontation. But all I'm trying to get at is that this doesn't, for those who think that India's the military challenge we face from China in our northern borders can be somehow addressed by India's commitment to the Quad or to the Indo-Pacific, I think they would be mistaken. In my view, they would be wrong. And I think we need to look again
just
at
a
those
quick
issues.
comment, Mr. Joshi. Just a quick comment. Yeah, I think one more aspect that we should address quickly, as we wrap this discussion, is before Antony Blinken's visit here, there was a lot of noise and headlines about how quote-unquote human rights issues would be on the agenda in view of what the Pegasus revelations are, in view of CAA, NRC and other such rules and laws which are being seen as very negative and targeted at certain segments of society in America and by Democrats. Now, after all of this conversation in the briefing, Blinken made it very clear that US and India spoke as peers about the challenges both our democracies face in protecting and being fair to all of our people. What do you make of the tone, and what is your takeaway in how the Biden administration is going to address some of these issues, because this was being looked at as a possible pain point when Joe Biden came to power?
I think it was a very clever move on the part of the US, part of Secretary Blinken, to have this early morning meeting with civil society groups. We know that the present government has put a lot of pressure on civil society groups. And these civil society groups, very carefully selected, they had people of all religious preferences. They had, and where the secretary talked about advancing an equitable, inclusive, sustainable, he used all the themes that we have. And I think he made it very clear that the people deserve to have a voice in their government and be treated with respect no matter who they are. And he made it very clear, but at the same time, I must say, he praised India's free media, independent courts, vibrant and free and fair electoral system. So I think and also, as I said, that he dealt with the civil society organization, that was very important, because this present government has been dismissive of civil society organization and has been actually harassing many of them.
Yeah. So balancing act there from Secretary Blinken today, and also talking about shared values between India and the United States, while perhaps speaking to what their voters want in the US as well with that early morning meeting. Thank you so much, Ambassador Bhatia and Manoj Joshi, for joining us on the chat today.